Is everyone warm enough? That's a relief. Thank you. Yeah, we have tried to turn the heating down a little bit, but we still haven't worked out how that part of our office works yet. We're quite new here, so yeah, maybe the next one will be a bit cooler. But yeah, thank you very much for coming along, everyone. So first of all, if you have the chance, please do join the dbt community Slack group. If you have Slack, there'll be some stuff posted on there from this evening. It's a good place to kind of have chat and conversation on. But going forward as well, you know, you have direct access to some great minds who can help you with technical questions and community questions. So I'd thoroughly recommend joining the group if you haven't already. So just a couple of housekeeping things before we start. So the toilets are just out on the landing. So just through the doors, the gentlemen are just in front and the ladies round to the left. And we just wanted to reiterate that tonight is a safe space for everyone. So there's lots of people who've come from different backgrounds here, but you know, we're a kind of community, and during the Q&A and everything like that, no question is a silly question. So please feel free to just get joined in as much as you can. But alternatively, we've got a bit of time at the end for networking. So yeah, if you want to ask questions of our speakers or anyone else who's maybe wearing a Datatonic t-shirt, just come and hunt us down and we'll be happy to help. Okay, next slide. So yeah, I'm Sam Jeremiah. I'm lead our commercial team here at Datatonic. So for those of you who we are a new name and a new company to you, we're a data and AI consultancy based here in London. We've been going for 6 years and we started in 1 Canada Square. Our founder Louis just kind of in a hot desk with this vision of creating sort of the best AI consultancy within the UK, and we've grown rapidly since. But we focus on building cloud technology solutions on data and AI platforms, and we partner with organizations such as Google Cloud, dbt Labs, and Fivetran, and many other organizations. But I won't go too much into detail about us, but there's lots of people here tonight with Datatonic t-shirts on. So if you want to come out and find out more about us and what we do and the type of projects we work on day to day, just come and hunt us down and we'll be happy to chat about that. So this is the agenda for this evening. So we've had food and drink, but talk one, we're going to be hearing from Dylan, which is going to be great. And then talk two, we'll have a short break after Dylan's spoken. And then talk two, we'll be hearing from our friends from VMO2. We'll finish up with some networking, and there's plenty more beer to go around and food to go around and everyone. So if you do want to stay and hang out, that'd be really great. So just a couple of things to cover before we hand over to Dylan. So a couple of notices from the community. So and there's a fireside chat going on between Sophia from dbt Labs and Brian, I believe, who's the Chief Product Officer of NASDAQ. That's on the 16th of February, 12 p.m. Eastern time. This is a reason to get into the Slack channel because we'll be posting the links on there. But obviously, you know, hearing from customers is going to be, you know, really beneficial to anyone. So please do kind of log into that if you can. Coalesce is a little bit of a way away, but please do track it, track what's going on there. It's an event that we at Datatonic invested heavily in last year, a really, really good event. And I think it's one of those ones that's just going to kind of grow exponentially over the next few years. So please do kind of keep an eye on Coalesce. And then finally, I've been politely informed that the Transform acquisition is a real big deal in the dbt space. If anyone wants to hear about this and how that's kind of like enriching the features of dbt, then hunt out one of our community mentors. We've got 3 dbt community mentors in the room tonight from Datatonic. That's Rahul, where are you? There you go, hand up. Mike, hand up. And Limona, somewhere else. There you go, roughly. So hunt them down. These are the guys that know the tech really well. They know what's going on in the community really well. Go and find them. They'll be happy to talk to you about what we're seeing. And then just to cover some product releases, I actually think someone was stitching me up with this generate some dogs in the IDE. But if anyone knows what that means, then please feel free to tell everyone. But there's some new feature releases in dbt utils version 1. That's something that would be good for you to cover with our community experts, for example. And then new service bundles. This is for organizations who are looking to kick off their dbt journey with dbt labs. They're offering some more kind of service bundles, package bundles to kind of get you kicked off. They're almost sort of jump starts that you get with kind of going on your journey with dbt. So these slides we'll be sharing, I'm sure, at the end, but the links are there for some more information about this stuff. Just one other thing before we hand over to our first talker. The session will be recorded tonight as well, so just to let you know that, but also the recording will be available afterwards. So anything that you need to kind of go back and re-listen to, we will be sending out a link. So that just leaves me to say a couple of thank yous. First of all, thank you very much for our 3 speakers today. It's great for you to give up your time. I'm sure everyone in the room agrees that hearing from customers is a hugely beneficial thing. Hearing really kind of what's going out in the big wide world. So thank you very much for giving up your time. We're really looking forward to hearing your talks. Thank you to all of the organisers for tonight as well. The people who set up the registration pages and tracked our registrations, put on the drink and the food. Our amazing team here at Datatonic. Thank you so much for the organisation. And we're going to do the talks and then have 10 minutes of Q&A at the end of the talks. And then any further questions that people want to ask, Dylan, Gordon and Jason are going to be hanging around at the end. So just kind of go and hunt them down. I've spoken to them all and they're all happy to sort of field questions from there. Sound good? Cool. Excellent. Right. So first off, Dylan. So yeah, thank you very much. I'll hand over to you.
Awesome. Is that working? Yeah, cool. Good evening, everyone. Cool, bit of a lag. I'm going to be talking to you tonight about, and I'll just read this, generating complete CI datasets with dbt. So for those who may not know what that means, in CI, you may want to build, you may do a dbt run or something like a slim CI when you're running dbt. There is feedback on this. We're going to turn that volume off. There we go. You may do a dbt run or something like that when you open a pull request or when you commit something to GitHub or things like that. And over time, you may want to speed those up, which may involve reducing the number of models that you build as part of a CI job. And then there may be times where even optimizing for speed, you still want to finish with what seems like a complete data set in your CI data set, something like a staging data set. And we're going to talk about kind of the why you may want to do that and the many, many ways how. My name's Dylan Atlas Baker. I have been very fortunate to be a dbt user for almost exactly 6 years, I figured out earlier today, since February 2017, if I'm doing that math right. I had the dbt team pull this because this is basically the only room where this is a flex. I was dbt cloud user number 13, which, yeah. I was in-house when I first started using dbt. I was very fortunate to be a very early user of dbt, and I've just loved to see the growth of it since, and I've been a user ever since. For a long time, I was a freelance consultant, so I helped about 20 plus companies deploy and scale dbt, both here and particularly in the US. And a couple years ago, I co-founded a company called Spectacles. Let's do a hubris check. How many people have heard of Spectacles before? More than I thought. That went better than I thought it would. Spectacles, for those who don't know us, the 5-second elevator pitch is we are an automated testing solution for your Looker instance. So if you are a team that is using Looker and you want to make sure that nothing is breaking when you're pushing a LookML change, or more pertinently for this group, nothing is breaking in Looker when you make a dbt change, Spectacles is something that can help with that. And that's not quite the end of you're going to hear about spectrals for this talk, but almost. This very much isn't a sell our product. But if you're interested in having a chat at any point about that, please come grab me after. So let's talk about a brief agenda. We're going to do a very quick run through of what CI is. So if anyone isn't familiar with CI, don't worry about it. It's actually something that until I guess relatively recently, many data practitioners would not have been familiar with. So we're going to run through that. We're going to talk about how that applies to dbt and kind of the like entry to moderate use case. We're then going to talk about why some of that moderate use case can sometimes be a problem. And then we're going to reel through what you can actually do about that. Cool. CI stands for continuous integration. That is two very long words that mostly just mean automatically testing your code as you prepare it to be deployed. I regularly rip off this graphic from the team at GitLab. The idea is commit shows up in your version control system. That can be GitLab, that can be GitHub, that can be Bitbucket, that can be Azure DevOps. I'm sure I'm missing some. And then some number of either like builds or tests or something automated happens on that code to give you confidence that it isn't going to result in your production, whatever, falling over and you getting a number of angry messages from your CEO. It's there to save you time. It's there to give you more confidence in your code. It's there to make sure that you aren't constantly bug fixing in whatever tool you're using, whether that's a dbt project or a front-end application or everything in between. So there's a bunch of different ways that CI can work in your dbt project. The one that I expect most people in this room are going to be most familiar with is the concept of checking your dbt runs. So reasonably standard practice for lots of people is every time we open a pull request that involves our dbt project, do a dbt run and a dbt test. You want to make sure that neither of those things are broken. Maybe you made a change over here and you tested it locally, but you don't actually realize that maybe one, you didn't test it as well as you should, or that it didn't break something all the way over on one other end of your project. And so that's really the idea of running something like dbt run and dbt test. Show of hands, how many people do this on a dbt project today? Cool. So the other thing you might do is check your SQL style. So you might, be content that dbt is going to run, but that people have written horrible SQL in there that you have decided is against your company style guide. SQL Fluff is a nice linter to do that. You may want to check the actual differences in the data. So dbt test will kind of do this for you if you kind of like really push it to its limits, but there's also tools like Datafold and Metaplane and many others that will tell you on a pull request, hey, you've done something that statistically changes this data in a meaningful way. The skew of this column is now radically different, and it might affect your dashboards, might affect your reports. So there's things that do that. You might have something that checks for broken content downstream. So it may be something that says, hey, your dbt project's fine, but actually you've renamed this column that is going to break 80% of your Looker dashboards, for example. And the final one as kind of reverse ETL or data activation or operational analytics, whatever we're calling these tools this week. High Touch and Census in particular have very nice integrations because they're kind of recipients of the data from your dbt model in the same way that a dashboarding tool is. And so they will tell you, hey, you've made a change that is going to break this high touch sync, for example. And so some dbt projects will have none of these. I expect many will have the first step. And then as your team grows in sophistication, complexity, size, there's a lot of different vectors by which you may choose to kind of expand on this. You may end up with a pull request that has like 6 or 7 checks on it, telling you that in multiple different ways, your code is either really good or really shit. So let's talk about that dbt step. So, and basically like what this looks like in a dbt context most of the time. So when you are starting out, and you may have both either small data or a small dbt project, most people will start with just a dbt run. They will have a CI job that does a full dbt run of the full project and a full dbt test of the full project. And the reason you can do that is because your project probably builds in enough time that you're not going to be waiting 30, 45 minutes, an hour for that build to happen. You're going to wait maybe a couple minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes for a full dbt run to happen that gives you confidence that everything is working successfully. in many cases, and we at Spectacles were a pretty small shop from a dbt project point of view. We actually still do this today. So we still just do a full dbt run. Probably takes about 4 minutes to build. Partly that's because we use a lot of views, but you can get away with that. And so that's the easiest way to do it. And often you could get that time down, but the complexity of doing that isn't worth the trade-off. And so you just stick with what's simple because it works well. People will do this either in dbt Cloud, as you can see here. So if you're a dbt Cloud user, dbt Cloud does this out of the box, at least on GitHub and GitLab, and I don't know if they've expanded beyond that. But you can really just tick a box that says run this job on pull request, and it will do it for you every time. And it will write a status back to GitHub that says, yes, this worked, or no, it didn't. And so people often pair this with a dbt test to make sure that all of their tests that I'm sure you're all writing all also pass. Eventually, though, either your data grows or your project gets much, much larger. And those runtimes go from a palatable 3 minutes to a very unpalatable hour and a half. And suddenly waiting for a CI check to take an hour and a half when you just want to merge in a small change or even merge in a big change, it's just an amount of time that has a feedback loop that is really, really problematic and isn't a good experience for anyone, and you end up looking like Justin Timberlake here. And so what you do from then is move to something that I've had in the title of these slides for about 4 slides now. You move to something called Slim CI in dbt. This is something that came out in kind of one of the later pre-version 1 versions of dbt, and allows you to significantly speed up these jobs. And the way that it does that is previously we were running all of this on every run and realized that, hey, we're only updating dim customers. So really, and dim customers, for those who can't read, this is the kind of top second from the right. And given that we're only updating dim customers, there's really only 2 models here that can break. One is dim customers, and one is the one thing that is downstream of dim customers. And so the question is, why are we wasting all of this time building all of these other models when really we just need to test dim customers and customer orders? And so what's really nice is dbt shipped something that allows you to do this. So they released a combination of terms you'll hear, but it all kind of gets aggregated as Slim CI. But the 2 key bits that you need to know are they added a defer flag and they added the state. And so what this command here lets you do is say, hey, do dbt run, but only run the models that have been modified. That's state::modified. Or the things downstream of those that have been modified, and that's the plus at the end. And the way that it figures this out is that you pass it a manifest file from one of your kind of production runs. And so it knows what's in prod, it compares it to what it has in your version when you're running this, and figures it out from there. There's a whole bunch of nuance to defer and state, which I didn't really want this presentation to be focused on. The docs, though, on it are really good, and so if this is a new concept to you, I'd highly recommend going to have a look at that. But the core thing you need to take away here is that you can then only run and only test the things that really could have broken, reasonably speaking, from the change that you have made. And so obviously, if we are going in this last example, thinking about it, from all of these models to just the 2, we have probably cut the runtime of that job down significantly. And that is better for the developer experience. It's better for our BigQuery and Snowflake costs. It's better for kind of almost everyone involved, except for a handful of use cases, which is going to be the rest of this presentation. So what's really nice about Slim CI is you've saved some money, you've probably saved some time, and you've added a bit of complexity to your project, but it's probably not the end of the world. And if all you're interested in doing is testing your dbt project in kind of that isolated way of testing, hey, has anything in this change broken dbt itself, you can probably stop there. But there are many ways of testing downstream processes that require a full data set. So if you have lots of things consuming your dbt models, which I'm sure is the case for most of you, because none of us build dbt models just to build dbt models. Ultimately, they get consumed by some other thing. That's a dashboard, that's a notebook, that's some embedded application, whatever it might be. Very rarely do we exclusively just have people writing ad hoc SQL queries in the BigQuery IDE, the Snowflake IDE, whatever it is. There's like a process around this that requires this data. you may want to test those downstream processes. You may want to make sure, hey, does this dbt change break my hex notebooks? Hey, does this dbt change break the embedded application that we've built in our app that uses this data? Hey, selfishly here, does this dbt change break Looker? So sometimes to do that, you just need the schema. And so the idea there is that you just want to check that the queries in whatever tool you've got are going to run. You don't really care about the data that's coming out of it. You just want to make sure, hey, are these dashboards not going to hit a database error? And for those things, you regularly don't need the data in those tables. You just need the tables and the views to exist with the right columns and the right data types. So you can kind of do everything off of that schema. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in a second. But other times you want to say, hey, this hex notebook should always output this number if I filter it for this date period. And for that, you're going to need the data as well. And so we're going to talk about how you can do both of those things in a kind of slim CI, cost-conscious, time-conscious way. As an example here, this is the last time you're going to hear me talk about this. As with Looker as an example, you want to test that all your dashboards aren't breaking. So Spectacles is going to run every Explorer in your Looker instance. For those who haven't used Looker, an Explorer is like the idea of a sandbox that defines joins between different tables. And because every dashboard is going to be built off an Explorer, you can run far fewer queries by just testing the Explorers instead of the dashboards. And to test every Explorer, all the tables and views need to exist in a CI data set. Looker and most BI tools don't give you the ability to kind of like dynamically test those things. And so in the way that our dbt integration works in particular, you need to generate a complete CI data set. But you're often not going to want to do that by doing a full dbt run, because as I talked about earlier, it's going to be way too expensive. So how can you get to those complete data sets in a cost-conscious and time-conscious way? The first thing you can do is you can run everything with a limit 0 and then run slim CI. So if you put a macro in your, and I'm going to show code and all this in a second for all three of these, but if you put a macro in your project such that you can build the whole thing without data flowing through it, you'll be able to build your project, your whole project, very quickly. There'll be no data in there, but you'll be able to do lots of testing of downstream processes with that setup. The second thing you can do is you can create pass-through views to the existing production models. So you need something to exist in the right place in your CI data set. And so often, we'll use dbt Cloud as an example here. The CI data sets get created as dbt Cloud PR and then some number underscore some number. And that is where all of your CI data goes when you build stuff on a PR when you're using dbt Cloud. And so if you only want to run slim CI, what you basically can do is create kind of placeholder views that just point to your production data, because you know that those models haven't changed. And so it's really just a select star from the prod data that this is pointed to. And that allows you to run a full, to kind of create a bunch of a full data set without doing a full dbt run, but you're actually going to have data in there because you know that that prod data wouldn't have changed. Those models weren't affected. And so you create pass-through views for everything and then run slim CI. And the third is you can do some form of cloning. And cloning works slightly differently on each database, and I'll cover that. But at its core, you do a clone. So instead of creating stuff that's just pointed to your production stuff, you actually use the very smart ways that particularly tools like Snowflake and BigQuery have implemented cloning that allows you to create a table that looks like the actual table, but in a really cost-effective way. I'm going to go through all these in much more detail. But the goal of all three of these is to produce a full data set that updates the models that need to be updated. So the key bit here that I've got in this purple, we'll call it, is that after you do these things, you still run the slim CI job. So you still, after you've cloned, need to run the models that have been changed. And so effectively the idea of like getting production into your existing CI data set and then running the things that have changed. And so you're still only running, in our example earlier, 2 models, but you end up with all of them, in most cases with data and in one case without. So what does running everything with a limit 0 look like? There's a couple ways to do this. This is the most simple. The simplest way is to create a macro. So you go into your macros folder in your dbt project and you create one that looks like this, which is limit 0. And then the key bit is this if target.name equals CI. And so that's basically saying if our target is equal to CI, add this limit 0 to my code where I have inserted that macro. And so in a SQL query, that looks like this. And so you will typically do this wherever you have made a raw reference to a source or to hard-coded table value. If you're doing that, don't do that, use sources. But wherever you are making a reference to something that isn't a model that dbt is building, you want to put that in. And then what happens is when you run a dbt run, there's no data in any of that. It means that it can operate on these tables incredibly quickly. And even with 1,000 models, you can do a really, really quick dbt run that has everything there. And so the benefit is that it's really, really fast. The downside, depending on what you're doing after, is that it may be empty. There's something really cool that made this kind of more possible in the last release, which is a small change, which is why it hasn't been like shouted out a ton. But this flag over here called favor state is a new thing in dbt. And so the way that the Slim CI functionality works is that it defers to your production data set. And so if you previously were to run a limit 0 run on everything and then ran all of this without the favor state flag, it would actually pull from those limit 0 models. When it got to the models that you were going to rerun, it was going to pull from those because the logic is effectively, hey, if I cannot find the thing that this should be built on, go and pull from production. And because in this case, you'd have done the limit 0 run and it could find that model, it would build on those and you get empty tables all the way through, even for the ones that you did want to legitimately rerun. And the problem there is you can't run dbt test because if there's no data in those tables, you can't check uniqueness, you can't check relationships, you can't check any of those things. And so what this favor state will do is saying, if anything is not in this select parameter, go and pull from prod. Even if the table does exist and you might, like you'd otherwise in defer mode, go and pick it, go and pull from prod instead. And so what this allows you to do after you do the limit 0 run is you would still run these, which means that the models that have been changed finish with data so that you can actually inspect those. But it means that if you have downstream processes that just require the schema, you have that at least for all of the other tables. The second option is you've got pass-through views. And the ways of implementing this are, there's a couple different ways, but at its core, you're going to run something like this, which is create a replace view where our target is. So in our CI dataset, that is a select star from our production dataset. And what that means is in my CI dataset where I would have done a dbt run, there is now going to be a view that looks like the table that should be there, except it's just going to pull all the data from production. And so all the columns are there, and it's a really useful way. Because views are so quick to produce, they don't process any data, you can do a ton of these in a really rapid period of time. And this is like an example of Jinja that might do this. And so the idea here is kind of there's 3 steps. Find all the models that exist in our production data set that should exist in our CI data set. 2 ways to do this. Typically, you either use the graph from the dbt Jinja context to find all of them, or you know what schemas they should live in, and you use the information schema from your warehouse. Depending on your implementation, whether you're using multiple schemas in production, 1 schema in production, multiple schemas in CI, 1 schema in CI, the way you'll do this will differ. You then create the pass-through views. So you basically iterate over the things that you found in the first step and create a bunch of views that just point to your production models. And then you run our favorite Slim CI, dbt run select state modified plus. And so what you end with is a data set that has data in every table, or at least returns data from every view or table that is in there with the updated ones run. And the third option is that you can clone these. Cloning data sets looks different on every warehouse. So I'm not going to go into kind of a huge amount of implementation here, but the idea is instead of creating views, you just run a clone command either on your production database, production schema, production tables 1 by 1, through some mechanism of cloning, you produce all the tables. So they are actually going to live in your schema, and then you run our Slim CI command. And so the latter 2 are similar. It's really just the difference of you creating pass-through views to your production tables or actually cloning all of those. Which leads to the question, which method should I use? There's really 2 major inputs or factors here. One is your warehouse, and the other, somewhat interestingly, is whether you're using dbt Cloud or not. Because whether you're using dbt Cloud is actually going to be almost the bigger difference in what I would tell you to do for these things. So let's go warehouse by warehouse. Last couple bits of user input. Show of hands who's on Snowflake. Like a third of the room. Limit 0, using dbt Cloud and not using dbt Cloud, both great, work really effectively. You're going to end up with empty tables, but if that's good for your use case, go and do that. Pass-through views not using dbt Cloud, really good, really efficient, works really well. Pass-through views using dbt Cloud is still going to work, but it's going to be slower. And I'm going to talk about why it's going to be slower on the next slide. Cloning using dbt Cloud, not using dbt Cloud, great, really efficient. And I'm going to talk about that in a sec. Cloning using dbt Cloud, still going to work. It's unfortunately going to be a little slower. And so we're going to go on a quick dbt Cloud and parallelization tangent here. The best way to run arbitrary SQL in dbt Cloud that isn't creating a table is running the run operation command. The run operation command, as I imagine I have on this next one, no, it doesn't. The run operation command lets you run any macro. So you say run dbt run operation, and you pass some macro, and it'll execute whatever you had in that macro. Really useful for stuff like creating pass-through views or things like cloning your database. Unfortunately, dbt core/Jinja doesn't enable operations to be run in like a multi-threaded or parallel way. So it means that every SQL command that you want to run, even though they're all kind of independent of each other, need to be run in sequence. And dbt Cloud doesn't allow you to run multiple run operation commands in parallel either. And so what this means is when you come to things like cloning, instead of kicking off, let's say, 30 clone commands simultaneously, you have to run them one by one if you're using dbt Cloud, which, as I said, you can still use these methods, but it will be slower. And it's a thing that I know that dbt, both core and cloud teams, are working hard on. So I don't expect this to be the way this is in perpetuity. But certainly today, if you want to do some of this kind of like more complex, like cloning or pass-through view stuff, it is going to be a little slower. And the reason for that, at least in the Snowflake case, is that Snowflake has a concept of zero-copy clones, which allows you to, as a borderline-free operation, certainly with no storage costs, clone one data set or one table or anything else into another place, which is great, and basically exactly what we want here. Except that database or schema level clones can be slow, and that is because they will clone tables one by one. So they under the hood, Snowflake doesn't apply any parallelization here either, which is dumb, and so a lot of the blame here should fall on Snowflake. I should say that Niall Woodward, who's going to wave his hand now because I'm going to put him on the spot, has done a ton of work on this, including the team at Miro, and there's a great blog post that I'm going to link to later about how you should think about doing this on Snowflake if you're going through that. And so the best way to do this on Snowflake is to run these at table level in parallel, because if you can clone 100 tables asynchronously simultaneously, that's going to be 100 times faster than doing it just at the schema level or the database level. And that can be a bit of a problem on dbt Cloud because you can only use the run operation, and which won't run in parallel. And so if you're doing this stuff on dbt Cloud, you can still do these things. It may be that on your warehouse, the clone operation for all of these isn't that slow, and so you're still fine, but it will be slightly slower than if you were implementing something else outside of dbt Cloud. This is the blog post. I don't love when people put links up on slides because it's hard to grab them, but if you want to take a photo of this, that QR code will work and link to that blog post. Not many people grabbing their cameras now, so don't know what. Cool. So in summary, yeah, this is basically your options on Snowflake. I really don't want this to dissuade people from using dbt Cloud. dbt Cloud is a great piece of software, but there are some edge cases here where it's going to be a little slower. Let's talk about BigQuery. Limit 0 works the same empty consideration, but that's been the same from the beginning. Pass-through views. It's the same thing as before. The most efficient way to execute these on BigQuery is in parallel, is doing a ton of these simultaneously, and dbt Cloud just ends up being a bottleneck there. And that's the exact same thing with cloning. And so BigQuery has two ways of cloning. Actually, there's kind of a third, but we're going to talk about two. One's the BQ CLI commands. And as of a couple months ago, this is quite new and really exciting if you're a giant nerd. You can now create table copy via DDL command, which means you can actually do it in something like a dbt macro. Previously, you could only do it from a CLI, which obviously in something like dbt Cloud wasn't available. So you can now do it. But again, you can do this efficiently, but really you want to parallelize those DDL commands. All these clones or all the clones are independent operations. You should just try to kick off as many of those as possible simultaneously. And finally, Redshift. How many people are on Redshift? Cool, some. Limit zeros still work, actually really, really good on Redshift. The way that the Redshift query compiler profiler handles limit zeros is really, really slick because I think of its history in Postgres. And so this actually works incredibly efficiently. Pass-through views still work, same consideration on dbt Cloud. You can't clone, unfortunately, despite what their docs will tell you. And the reason for that is it doesn't really have a copy command. And so if you go down this path, people will typically recommend one of two things. They'll recommend you either do create new table as select from original table, which does create like what you could consider to be a clone of the table, but does it in an incredibly expensive operation. It's really going to take all the data from the first one and put it in the second, and on something like Redshift, that's really expensive. And then the other thing that you'll see people pass around is create table, new table like original table. And what the like command here is it creates an empty table that has the same schema as the first one. And then they'll say, insert into new table, select from original table, which is an incredibly expensive operation that moves all the data from the first one into the second one and is really slow. So I wouldn't advocate for either of them. If you're on Redshift, do the pass-through views or do the limit zero. Actually, I'll stay on one of these. I meant to talk about Databricks in here, and I could lie to all of you, but the truth is I know fuck all about Databricks, and so I wasn't going to do that. Databricks, the first two methods will work effectively. The cloning commands should work. They've actually got kind of a concept of deep and shallow clones on Databricks. So if you're on there, I'm happy to have a chat. Conceptually, everything that I've talked about for the other warehouses, it all is going to work the same on Databricks or DuckDB or whatever data warehouse you are on today, but don't personally have enough experience to reliably talk about it. So what is CI? Just a way of testing your code and making sure it works. Start with dbt runs on dbt, move to Slim CI, and then if you do want to do testing downstream stuff, you want to make sure that your BI tool is not breaking, and you need to generate full data sets. Do one of the things I talked about today, either running with limit zeros, pass-through views, or cloning if your database supports it. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks very much, Dylan. So we've got sort of 7 or 8 minutes for some questions. So anyone who wants to go first? Okay. What, do you actually throw it? Is it a microphone? Apparently that's a microphone.
Hello? Oh, it is. You said you're an early adopter of dbt. Like, why were you? How come you heard about it? What was the reason behind that? Thank you.
So before dbt Labs was dbt Labs, they were a consulting firm, a very good consulting firm called Fishtown Analytics. And I happened to join a company that must have been the first, second, or third consulting client of Fishtown Analytics. And so I had joined this company called Simba Sleep. They sell mattresses. Some of you may own them. I was joining as the first analytics hire while they were waiting basically for my probation to finish where I was before. They brought Fishtown in to do some work. They put dbt in place, and that was it. So I was very fortunate to work very closely with Tristan and particularly Drew as part of that. And really that was it. It's like pure, I wish I could say I knew that it was going to be this amazing thing or I'd sought it out myself, but it was just pure random luck. And I was just very fortunate to land there because honestly, most of the consulting work I did after that was as a result of that kind of fortuitous event. And I probably wouldn't be doing what I was today if I hadn't been that fortunate. Little tidbit for everyone. Back then, I imagine when many of you started using dbt, it may have already been called dbt Labs. Prior to that, the GitHub repo was Fishtown Analytics /dbt. Prior to that, when I started using dbt, there was this idea of like a collective of companies starting something called the Analyst Collective, and that being the thing that kind of maintained and was responsible for dbt. And so the GitHub organization at that time was the Analyst Collective, to the extent that that is at all interesting to any of you.
Thank you. So when dealing with SimCI, like with a lot of our customers, we find a point where they start running out of road, where like the dbt project starts to scale beyond like 300, 400, 500 models. And then we'll start poking them towards something like Dagster, where you can actually start using sensors and sort of restricted materializations for dbt. If you were to sort of redraw your chart of like, when do you use dbt Cloud? When do you use these different methods? Like, what's your view on a dedicated orchestration tool outside of a transformation tool like dbt?
So I think it's worth like, I'm not sure I'd ever use something like Dagster for CI. I definitely use it for orchestration of my production jobs. I'm not sure it's necessarily like I'm not sure I'd use Airflow, for example, for the CI portion of it.
Well, that's kind of interesting because Dagster Cloud is currently pushing
Yeah.
BI integration as part of their cloud services.
So I think part of it is that if you're doing stuff, if the question is how do you update stuff dynamically based on like a data source that's been updated, which is what a sensor, I guess, would primarily be for.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if the CI use case is relevant for that, because ultimately the trigger for my CI job isn't that a data set has been updated, it's that my code has been updated. And so I need to kind of understand what the delta in my dbt project is, not just what are the dbt data sets that need to be updated when a data source has been updated. And so I think you could run all of this stuff through Dagster, but unless I'm missing something, which I may be, but if the key trigger is a change in code, not a change in data, I think you're ultimately going to fall back on something like this, like the defer and state method here to test that, because you're ultimately, I think, still going to want to test everything. You could make business decisions that are otherwise, but I think in a holistic world, you'd still want to test everything that is downstream of the change that you have made in your code base.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, because a different angle on it is what you're seeing companies do now is actually break apart their dbt projects into a series of sort of separate projects that they run then with like sort of cross project dependencies in, which kind of deals with that issue where you would have different data marts flowing through dbt. Anyway,
for sure, though, to the extent that like the lineage in the broadest sense still ends up the same, I'm still probably going to want to run the same number of models. It's everything downstream of whatever the thing that I've changed is. Unless you've got a way of controlling the data contract between that dbt project and the dbt project that imports it without running the dbt project that is downstream of it, I at least in what I've seen, I'm not sure what the best way to enforce that contract would be, but it may be that there's things that I just haven't got the experience with.
Okay, thank you.
Time for 2 more questions.
Hopefully a quick one. So for a positive and then a slightly, I guess, controversial negative, what is your favorite feature about dbt? It could be anything simple, it doesn't be anything complicated. What's your current pain point of dbt as well?
So my favorite feature is like so basic, but I came to dbt from like an analyst who really hadn't done anything akin to data engineering before. And the ref function is magical. Like the fact that you can build these things, and anyone who's done this in Airflow before, where you've had to manage all of this manually or in other tools, those tools are all getting much better. But that magic of like just being able to write SQL that references each other and it all figures itself out from the direction that I came from in my career was transformative for me. Like it just made all the difference. And so it's like, I mean, it's kind of, it's maybe a cop out because I'm basically saying like my favorite feature of dbt is dbt because it is the core bit, but it is like that what that unlocks for a lot of people, particularly if you're coming from I hate the word less technical, but like a less software engineering background, I think just unlocks a bunch of stuff for people, and it empowers them to do a bunch of stuff, which I think was kind of core to the vision of dbt. What are my pain points? Honestly, some of the like I love dbt. I love dbt Cloud. I think the stuff I've talked about today around this like efficient way of generating these complete data sets is probably the biggest one. And that's mostly just biased because of the type of company I run and what our requirements for our customers are on dbt. And I do know I've had conversations with the team there, and there's issues you can see in their public GitHub where they talk about this stuff, where they talk about after Niall posted his blog post, someone created an issue about like exposing an ASIC endpoint, and they've talked about how, you know, could you do a dbt run in a defer state where instead of creating for ones that haven't been issued, they do the clone for you so that you could leverage the multi-threads that they allow. I'm sure it's heading in that direction. But that certainly for me is like the major pain point today. And it's mostly because it's the pain point of our customers.
Thank you.
You talked about what the implementation looked like for the limit zero case macros in the models themselves. Could you talk a little bit about what that implementation looks like for the alternate strategies where you need to run some command or DDL to create the views or to do the cloning? Does that just live inside your CI job? And then also how that's linked to the manifest. So do you have to, is there a tool or do you have to just manually figure out what has changed to know what to clone?
Yeah, so if you're using dbt Cloud, you can tell it, use the manifest from another job. And so that will do it all for you out of the box. If you're trying, well, if you're doing the Slim CI stuff. For like the cloning, you still need to go and figure out what you need to clone. You can use the manifest, you can parse through the nodes in the Jinja context, or you can use the information schema. But if you're on dbt Cloud, all of that's going to live in a macro. You're going to do all of that in a macro and you're going to call it via a run operation. If you're not on dbt Cloud, you may still want to do it in a macro if you're going to like kick off multiple dbt run operations with different arguments, but you may just want to run a Python script or something else that does that asynchronously. In the non-dbt Cloud, if you're using GitHub Actions or Circle CI or something, you're going to have to go and find that manifest file. So for those of you who aren't familiar, the manifest file is a object that's created basically on every dbt command that basically tells you the state of the project at that point in time. And so the way that a lot of this Slim CI stuff works is you basically go and find the manifest file from a production run, bring it into your current environment, and point dbt to it and say, hey, here's what prod looks like. You know, because you're in my project, what dev looks like. Go and do the diff between the two. And so, yeah, in dbt Cloud, that gets done automatically. And not dbt Cloud, you need to go and, you know, on a prod run, you dump that to S3, and then at the beginning of your CI job, you go and pull that from S3 or something like that. And then if you're not using dbt Cloud, you could use a dbt run operation, but equally like write a Python script to do all of that as well. If you're trying to do the multi-threaded stuff, it's probably going to be easier to do it not using dbt as the entry point, because they're just going to throttle you for those types of operations.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
So we're going to have a 5-minute break, so grab a drink, and then we'll be back for our second talk. Cheers, mate. It is. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Then let's give Niall some speak about and yeah. Up on the screen. Thank you very much. Yeah. I'll be publishing the slide as well. My details not affected.
Right, 1 minute, and then we're going to start our second talk. So grab a drink, grab a seat. Yeah. Sam, all right. I should know this stuff. Yeah, we're going to be doing more. We've got an analytics engineering specific meetup in our office in a few weeks' time. So yeah. Okay, we're going to crack on with our second talk. Sound a klaxon or something. Okay, so we're gonna carry on with our second talk. So and then there's plenty of time at the end for networking. So yeah, let's we'll hear from our second talk and do some Q&A, and then we can finish off with some networking at the end. So So yeah, we're really pleased to be joined by Gordon and Jason from VMO2. So looking forward to their talk. So over to you guys.
Evening, everyone. Thanks for inviting us here tonight. We're from VMO2, so that's the Virgin Media, and O2, the telecoms company, which have merged 2 years ago. And our title is 0 to 160, and this is our, sorry, I'm just trying to get this mic right. This is our desire to get our analysts and data scientists onto dbt, and how we did it in approximately 9 months and onboard 160 individuals. In this presentation, we're looking at why we did it. I think dbt were a bit shocked when we turned around to them and said, we want to get 160 licenses, and yeah, and how we did it. So top is me, and below is Jason, Alex, engineering manager. So the way we're going to run this talk is I'm going to talk about the problem or the scenario, and then Jason's going to pick up more like this. Is that better? Okay, super. And Jason will deal with the technical side of things and how we approach things and the way we went about it. Okay, so VMO2, as I said earlier, they merged 2 years ago, and they embarked on what they call the digital transformation, and this is digital, going digital with our whole infrastructure. The two companies, both of them had all their data on premise. It's a 45 million customer databases on 2 on-premise systems, and we had to move them onto a cloud system, as well as migrating the 2 systems together. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and part of what we're challenged with is how do we get analysts, data scientists operating in this environment and onboarding them. So I think we decided we would start with the scenario of what happened in these 2 companies over the last few years. It's a typical story across a lot of companies, and basically where we started was we had engineering teams that were sitting over here building data warehouses, and analysts and data scientists working on the other side, and this worked perfectly well. The only problem is that the analysts grew rapidly as the company's demand for data grew, and the data warehousing engineers stayed pretty static. So all these questions were being pushed back to the data engineers, and the data engineers started getting frustrated. So where we go from here is what happened is the data engineers, who have different line management to the analysts and the data scientists, started building a wall. They started going behind the wall and saying, okay, we're going to funnel inquiries, we're going to funnel change. And that ended up annoying the analysts and the data scientists, who then, in their own way, decided to build their own data. Oh, that hasn't worked very well. They decided to build their own sub-data warehouses where they transformed their own data. This happened across here. Other teams would then borrow their data because that was where the corrections had been made in the database. And what happened was this team that invested in that became data warehouse owners. And basically what happened was that they got annoyed that these guys were pinching their data, as it were. And so they started to wall off their data. And these guys were then forced into their own data warehousing situations, where they built their data warehouses, and all these sub-data warehouses started appearing. And what we ended up with is this horrible situation of data silos happening across the company. Now, we're talking about hundreds of data silos, not just 10 or 15. And all the data has been spread across the company like that. There was no basic tooling to do this. This was basically happened organically. People were moving data in the morning, 9 o'clock, push play, move my data across. I was absolutely amazed this was happening. No standardization. Each team had its own process. There's no collaboration, no safety, no trust. And basically, the anger in my soul was, I hate every data silo I see. And obviously no repros as well. So nobody knew what was going on in these areas. So challenge with the mission is, how do we get rid of all of this? How do we empower these guys to do that? And how do we how do we get things delivered? So when we looked at this, we thought, well, how are you delivering a product if everyone's working in silos? And actually, the real answer was we're not really delivering data-driven products. Everything takes 9 months. Everything takes a year. But we want to be delivering these en masse at scale every week. How are we going to get into that situation? So one of the things we had to do is we had to empower the data community. So we had to look at them. First thing we looked at is how can we get everything automated? Second thing we look at is how do we approach these guys? How do we bring them together as one team again? They're all technically one team, but how do we bring them together? And second problem is how do we go from this situation to delivering data solutions at pace? Massive problem. Our director at the top level of AADS, Advanced Analytics and Engineering, really wants to deliver data at pace. He wants his data scientists pushing out deployments at hundreds a week, not this, oh, we'll get something done in some time in the future. And then finally, to create a safe and trusted ecosystem. So an ecosystem, and I call it an ecosystem, not an environment, because you'll understand this later, but to create an ecosystem where everyone's trusting the data, everyone's committed to the data, and everyone's developing that data that then gets federated back out to the company. So we're a team of 9 people. How do we do this? We have 2 Bibles in our team. One is the Toyota TPS, which is the Toyota process system. We look at the way Toyota deliver raw products to real products, and we take the best bits and we implement them in a team. And the other one is the Phoenix Project, which you probably all read. And if you haven't, I would really hope you do it sometime soon. So we go back to the DevOps principles. First one, locality, simplicity, focus, flow, and joy, improvement of daily work, psychological safety, and customer focus. And our belief is if we get these right, the data products will flow, and ultimately our customers will win. So locality and simplicity. Oh, that has come out terribly well. So our scenario was this. Do you want to click the button, see if it moves on a bit? So our situation was this, that we had the data warehouse team sitting over here with a wall and loads of silos. What we needed to do, ignoring the lines, was bring our data warehouse team here from behind the wall and be surrounded by all our analysts and data scientists. Apologize for the screen. So basically the first thing we did was we say, we cannot be in a different team to the analysts and the data scientists. We have to be in the same team. We have to have the same leadership. If we have the same leadership, we have the same structural leads goals. So we're all going to go the same way. The second thing was we need to now embrace each one of these guys to make sure that they understand what we're trying to do and they're fully committed to go through that. So that is to bring in collaboration, cohesion, trust, and everything else that comes with it. Say, look, we've moved across departments to sit with you. So now what we're going to do with you is we're going to take you on a journey with us that will give you the power to move, transform data, and actually give you a whole new lease of life on what you can do with data. So my challenge when I looked over to Jason was, we're going to give them a tool that they're going to transform data with. And after that, we're going to go through a load of processes to improve and justify it. But what I want you to find is that tool that is the easiest to use to transform data from people. And I think the previous speaker spoke about this, is what do you love about dbt? The fact that it has a low level of entry. There are other tools. I've done this before at a previous e-commerce company, used Airflow to do that. But this time I looked at the situation, the level wasn't quite as high. I was really concerned about a few things. So I pushed it over to that team to say, what tool can we use so that these guys can start transforming data, stop the technical debt that they've got of manually moving data into their silos? How can we create an environment that all this data is going to sit in and federate out and constantly return into the environment? So I'll hand over to Jay.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. So what was the situation at the beginning and what we effectively wanted to move away from? So there's a number of points on the left-hand side, and as you know, it's a big company. Analytics engineering is quite new. So what we found was there was varying levels of skill sets. So we had guys who were data scientists, very proficient in Python, they understood version control and they did SQL. And then we had another subset of people, so analysts, and they could have that range from SQL experts to Excel experts to PowerPoint experts. So we had quite a mixed bag of people, and what the idea was, all these people need to get on a common stack. We need to get them all in a place, which effectively meant that we can, achieve our goals. Another problem that we had at the time was there's many different ways of working across the business. As you know, in a big company, there's different priorities, different teams, different management, and then obviously different ways of working. So how do we handle that? How do we fix that? And also, how do we get everybody working in a similar way, which then again leads to the goals that we need. We had issues with like corporate machines and a lot of things were complex to roll out. So the technology, if you wanted to introduce a new technology, there's many layers of process. As a big corporation, it's quite hard to do change quickly. And then again, we had the issue of it's a small team. There was only 9 of us, and we're talking, Virgin Media's got in excess of 1,000 technical people in various capacity. So we were, for all purposes, a very small team. So Gordon, as he said, he tasked me, he said, okay, how do we fix this? What can we do? Or are we just stuck? And then the requirements that we came up with was the tool that if we get a tool in, what can it do? And the first one is straight away, it needs a shallow learning curve. It needs to be easy. Somebody needs to come in from day one with no experience and get hands-on straight away. And we looked at many things across the board. So this, dbt CLI, which I'm guessing a lot of you are familiar with, but a lot of people that would be foreign to them. And then also Airflow, again, which adds more complication. And how do you scale that across a department? So you have obviously varying levels of skill, and it just doesn't scale because they'll all do things differently at varying, levels of quality, should we say. So yeah, the tool needed flexibility for wide use cases. Again, each team works differently, and it also needs to conform with what IT policies that we have as a business. And then the last point being, going back to the small team, we needed to look after it. So we needed something that's easy for us to look after, and as a central team, make sure everybody else doesn't have a lot of issues and we don't get swamped with support requests. So what did we come up with? Broken PowerPoint slide. I'll move on. So yeah, that did say dbt Cloud. It was the obvious choice. There's a few other ones around there, but it seemed to hit up the mark on everything that we needed. So we went with dbt Cloud. And then going back to the philosophy of locality and simplicity, which in simple terms, locality is we need each team to be able to work in their area without affecting other people. And then simplicity is obviously make everything as simple as it can be. And from there, these are the key 8 points that we thought would be useful to know today. There's obviously many more. The number one being reduce level of entry. So whatever we do has to be easy. People have to come in and get going straight away without a big, massive learning curve. Number 2 is targeted training. So again, because of the levels differences and the skill set differences, we need to offer training. So that was face-to-face training, videos, which I'm sure a lot of you have watched, and then also making sure people are multi-skilled so they can actually, work across the board. They're not pigeonholed. Number 3, which is one of my big bugbears and one thing that we didn't want to replicate from the on-prem world, is we need to reduce or eliminate cross-team processes. So if we have a requesting team and a action team, as it were, we want to make sure the communication between the two teams is even non-existent, like as a bad process. If the process for the sake of process, it's not good. Nobody likes that. So eliminate the ones that are not needed and make it easy where we have to put them in. Level 4, level the playing field. Again, this is about upskilling everybody to a certain level. So the idea, and where I think we're quite close to getting to now across the board, across 160 plus people, is we have the skill sets at a base. So what we define as, a base level of skills is you need to know SQL, you need to understand the concepts of version control using dbt Cloud. So not necessarily advanced, but understand what it's doing. And then also some data science guys, they know Python. So that's for them a minimum as well. Number 5, cloud-based tooling. So this goes back to the simplicity. It makes things a lot easier. The connectivity between the tools, if they're all cloud-based, is much easier than trying to host and run on-prem infrastructure and then connect it all up with the networks in the way. And, so we use GitLab on, the online version, we use dbt Cloud, and they just connect like naturally. Number 6 is each team has their own project. So this goes back to locality. We want to make an area in dbt where every team can work with freedom without affecting other teams, because we didn't want to go down the route of having 160 people all working in the same area with multiple skill sets. It'd just be chaos. Number 7 is ensure centralized foundations. So anything that's across the board, so mostly the tech stack, centralize it, look after it centrally, so we can take that work and effort and cog turning away from each individual team. And basically we look after all of that to make sure that they don't have to, so they can focus on something else. And then number 8 is have a clear remit. So with our team, we oversee many other teams, that sub-teams and specialists in their area, but a lot of teams tend to think inwardly. So they'll get a piece of work, they think about this piece of work and how I can build and push it out as quick as possible. But if you've got many teams not communicating between themselves, that can cause issues. So where we would come in is we look at what they're doing and we say, okay, guys, you do this, but if you do it this way, it helps this other team elsewhere that they wasn't aware of. So we're kind of like the Overwatch, which is where our remit would sit. And then that helps us to basically guide the ship, but without, being a bit too strict on certain rules.
So the next stage is the focus, flow, and joy, and what we're trying to do is when we look at the world of data and when it flows through the systems, and we look at the old way of doing things, with the old system where you had a data warehouse and you had everyone taking out, it sort of made a picture to us that in this world, people. We talk about the environment all the time now and everything like that. And when I look at the old data warehouse systems, what I saw was everyone taking out of a Kimball data warehouse, an old data warehouse system, taking the data away, adding value to the data, and then the data disappearing off somewhere else. Yeah. And when I spoke to the team, I said, well, is this right? Because if we look at it in a modern day view of an environment, everyone wants to put back in the environment. Yeah. So we take something, but we have to put something back. We have to replace it. And so we took this value and we said, right, if you're going to take out of the environment, if you're going to take out of our data models, we want you to put something back in. You're going to leverage value out of that. You're going to do something with transformation that leverages value to that. We need to sit down and talk about how do we put that back in the data models so that other teams can leverage what you do. They don't have to repeat what you do. We will put that information back in the system. So it could be a team that's sending out communications and they have all their customer traits and they're sending that off to a system like Braze. That system, why can't it feed back into our data models and go to Braze so the other teams can see exactly what's happening across the marketing environment? Or when teams find great stuff like data science, pushing stuff out through Vertex out to the world, coming back with information, how is that data information feeding back so the analysts can pick up on the information and use it? We need an ecosystem that's constantly feeding back into our data models so that data is always moving and we're replenishing that data model so that we can federate the data back out. So this is all about, actually, when we look at the environment, we need to feed the environment to keep it alive. And we need to feed our data models to keep them alive. We need to keep pushing that golden pieces of information the analysts are creating. We need to push that back into our models. So we turned around and challenged the team and said, how can we make it so that it's easy to put data back in, information back into our data models and feed those data models? And so we ended up with 3 ways of doing it.
I'm not sure who did these slides, but it wasn't us. So yeah, looking at this semi-broken diagram, I'll try and explain it the best I can. It doesn't look like that originally. They've got the 3 key points there. And essentially what you have is the analytics engineering team. So think of that as like a central team, which is us, but then each individual team off the back of that with specialist, knowledge in a certain domain. So for example, we've got analytics there, but that could be, a business specific analytics team, for example, the networking team or the customers team, for example. Data science covers quite a wide range. And then marketing comms is another example we put there, which would probably sit under analytics. So what the process effectively is we encourage collaboration. So that's the red part, which should have a couple of lines going into the data modeling section. So think of these data models as the central gold standard. This is where everyone should source their data in the first instance because it's trusted and it's built by us. There is other sources as well from the data lake of varying quality. So we always encourage build gold standard, push the gold standard data out to the rest of the company through various other teams. And we do that in collaboration. So our team and a different specific expert team. So for example, the customer team, they'll work with us, we'll build out the models, and then that's now available through the black lines into the rest of the department, and then eventually the rest of the company. Point 2 is direct ingestion from team areas. So this is where we can then leverage. So being a small team, there's only so much we can do. However, we've got a large, department of people that can build and then push that back into the central place for everybody else to use. So what that would involve is you'd have, for example, a bunch of code effectively that somebody builds, but that could be constantly changing, but it's also useful for other teams and it's regarded as a standard for that specific area. So in this case, marketing, and that would then push directly back into our central area and then available as a source again for everybody else. And then the third part, which is where the differentiator is, and that line should go around and back. Effectively, that's a sharing area. So one of the issues that we have is sharing data across teams. They need a central place to share the data, so the data availability is always high, but it wouldn't necessarily be classed as gold. It could be something that somebody's built. It could be something that they've built ad hoc, but it's not really relevant for the majority of everybody else, but a certain team would like that. So that would go into the sharing area. And then if we decide at some point in the future that it's high value, or it's effectively something that we go, okay, this is a gold standard, everybody should have access to this, we will then go through the process of moving that back into the central data modeling area.
So the next point is improvement of daily work. So the improvement daily work is how much joy can we give to the analysts and the data scientists by giving this extra freedom? And my idea is that they come to work every day. If they sit in their silos, they're very comfortable, they're very happy. But what I want to do is make them excited about what they can do. They can access all the data from across the company. They can move that data. They can innovate. They can play. They've got their area to play in. The data's protected, it's all tagged. So we're pretty confident to let them loose with things. Yeah. So this is us trusting them. Yeah. So quite often I hear from other analytics engineers, oh, it's okay to let data science do everything, but we don't let our analysts do anything. Yeah. But when I talk to data scientists, they say, yeah, but all our code, we just nick it from the analysts and then we put it there and we move the data across and then we take it through to our data science project. So my simple thing is I really want people to think about trusting analysts. If we empower the analysts will get things done. Yeah, they're the power horse of most of our companies. And what we want to do is we want to standardize the way of working. So when we bring this to the environment, we let them go a little bit loose and then we bring in standards. And these standards will be cleansing. You have to cleanse this way, you have to do it this way, and everybody has to do it the same way. And the key thing behind that is that when everyone's doing it the same way, everyone trusts what everyone else is doing. And that trust then perpetuates that I accept what you're doing and I would like to use what you're doing and take it forward. And then every time through continuous improvement, we're continuously bringing in new rules, upscaling everyone to the new rules and then upskilling. So this is not a process that's going to happen overnight. It's going to happen over years, that we continuously improve the status of the analysts working in the environment. We have low standards at the moment. We're always improving them. We can improve them through the CI pipelines. We can improve them through process. We can improve them through looking at what they're doing, and we can improve them through studying the run times and the costs on GCP as well. Second point is how can we simplify the process? So we're always trying to look for ways to simplify the process. And that doesn't mean that we want to bring in loads of tools and constantly bring in tools. Tools are only there for streamlining process. I've stolen that quote from Toyota TPS. Only bring it in a tool if it streamlines a process. Okay. So dbt does our streamlining process for it. In fact, when I talk to the team, we don't look at dbt as a streamlining process. We actually look at dbt as a DevOps tool. Yeah, this is allowing us to set an environment which is a DevOps environment amongst the analysts and data scientists. And then Final one, which we go on to, is how can we create a DevOps environment based on continuous improvement? So at the end of the day, continuous improvement is our end goal. If we continuously improve everyone, we make everyone's lives happier, and we're continuously improving every aspect, skills, processes, and data, everything gets better over time. Everything just continually improves, and it makes our processes much better. The number of times I talk to people about when they start a new project, they start from afresh. But we don't want that situation. We want to go back and say, what, can we just add a column to this model, or can we just add a column to this data set? Will that give us enough information to carry on the projects? It's about incremental changes. We don't want to make any big changes now. We built 38 data models across our platform in 9 months. We should be building probably 12 more, maybe 15 more. But at the end of the day, what we want to do is make incremental changes to these models now to develop them over time, to enrich everyone's lives.
So with the philosophy of improvement of daily work, what does that look like? The first one is don't migrate the debt. So in our situation, we had a big on-prem ecosystem, lots of debt, very historic, lots and lots of changes over time, lots of knowledge lost over time, and a lot of debt. And the first thing we thought, okay, we don't want any of that. We're starting a greenfield, we're moving to the cloud. We don't want to replicate what's there if we can help it. Number two is analyze the debt that can be removed with a technical solution. So this is in cases where we had to bring over some debt for various reasons. So that could be a process, a pipeline, or some code. But then what we straight away needed to look at was how do we automate this so it isn't cumbersome. And a lot of that debt was manual. So straight away, my thought process is automate. Make sure that if we have to bring something bad over, it's not going to cause a lot of time. It's not going to be that time consuming. Point three, centralize common tools and code. So again, this relates to us being a central team for everybody else, and how do we scale? What we didn't want to happen is many people in many silos making the same types of code. So it should be held in one place and people just make use of it. So if you're familiar with dbt packages, that's kind of the same concept. We also have an internal one, which we then use to bring in some business logic, and then people can just make use of that in SQL. And we also do it outside of dbt as well. We do, referring back to Dylan's CI speech, we basically do slim CI and use SQL fluff, and that's centralized, which will then push out to the various teams. So they don't have to worry about it. It just runs in the background. Number four, abstract away the environment foundations. So this relates back to a point that I made earlier, where essentially you take away the cog turning. People, especially other teams and specialist teams, shouldn't be focusing on turning cogs, looking after the environment, checking DBTs up. That should be held by a central team. They look after this, and it basically frees up the other teams to drive some business value and insights. Number five, implement easy processes. So if you can't remove them and you need a process, make it as easy as possible. Again, it goes back to nobody likes doing a process, but if it's got a purpose and you need one, make it as easy as possible. So for example, we have Slack. We do have sections in Slack, which effectively can be used as a ticketing system, whereas in the on-prem world, that would be a whole ticketing IT type process, which could take a week rather than a day. Add guardrails. So this relates to stopping teams when they do think inwardly, because they don't have the overarching view like we do. Stop them making mistakes. So what does that look like on a technical point of view? We have UAT environments. Each team has their own UAT, and we don't let them cross-contaminate UAT to UAT, which they don't like, because effectively we're saying you can't have that team's data unless it goes to prod. It's not ready yet, so you still can't have it. So what the reason for that is because we find that teams will build off somebody else's UAT data and then push theirs to prod, which then effectively breaks because the first team haven't told them, and it's still in UAT, so it's not production ready. We have got ways around that, because obviously there is need where a team needs to see other people's data, and that goes back to the sharing area, but then it's clearly marked, this is UAT, and it's centralized so everyone can see where the data is coming from. It's not a hidden mesh of data flying around with no visibility. Point 7, build a process of moving specific data back to the central location. So again, this relates back to the ecosystem and pull back the work. And where this helps the improvement of daily work is people can build a product, and then they tend to own it. If you build it, you own it. But what they don't want to do is own it forever, and then that means support. So what tends to happen is we'll say, okay, this is good enough. We understand how this works. We will take ownership, centralize it. You don't have to worry about it ever again, within reason. And they tend to like that because it frees up their time to do less cog turning, and they can keep moving forward, building new and better things. And then point 8, mentor teams on best practices. So this goes back to the training, but once the training's done, there's also best practices on top. And what we try to do is not necessarily teach them things like, how to write SQL better, but it can be more a case of ways of working, writing SQL better for a certain purpose, and also try and steer the ship. Because again, we oversee a lot of teams, and we kind of, if they all do a certain best practice, the whole department moves forward as one, rather than various, again, levels of skill. And it helps overall. It's not necessarily just how to write code and move on. There's extra steps that we go to make sure everybody's at least consistent.
This is my favorite one. It's the psychological safety. I take this one really seriously. It's often one that's overlooked, but I think this is the one you need to focus in on. We've taken 160 people from a siloed environment where they're very comfortable, and we've thrown them in with everybody else, and they're nervous. We're saying, start moving data. We trust you to move data. I've never moved data before. What am I going to do? This is really important. We need to build that real trust factor between all the teams and ourselves to know that they can come and ask us anything. We've got tons of Slack channels, hidden communication channels. If you want to ask something that you think looks really stupid, you can come to individuals. Everything in this world that we've set up is about psychological safety. If people feel safe, they'll take risks. And you know what? We want them to take risks, because when you take risks, you innovate. And when you innovate, you change things. And this is all about change. We want people to take risks in our company. Yes, there'll be mistakes. Yes, processing costs might shoot up one day because somebody's done something weird. I was going to say silly, but this is psychological safety, so I'm not allowed to. But these things happen. That's a fact of life. We just move on. Yeah. It's a quick chat. What went wrong? Let's talk about it. Okay, let's not do this again. Once people are testing stuff and they're finding out stuff, it enables collaborations and experimentation between teams. I mean, that was great. Well, I was talking to one team the other day, and they've set up a squad with analysts and data scientists and engineers and MLOps. And I looked at that squad, and I thought these guys would never have got together before. But now they're feeling confident to do their own little project on the sideline in their own time to build something. They only had a couple of questions to ask me about how we should be moving data and what they were allowed to do and not allowed to do. And I just went, well, as long as you're in the rules, you can do what you like. That's so encouraging to see, and I'm hoping that happens more and more and more. What's really important is that they understand where we come in and where they own stuff. So when they build it, you own it. That's a fairly simple principle. Yep. At some stage, you can pass it across to our team to look after. But basically, if you own it, if you build it, you own it. Actually, that's really great for young, upcoming analysts who have built some great stuff, and they own it, and they're pushing it out to the rest of the company. They're getting recognition for that. This is about collaborative builds across the company. This is about, the end goal is to drive data-driven products to market. Yeah. So if we enable this and people can show their skills, they actually take this really seriously. Continuously improving skills. I keep going on about this continuous improvement. This is the bog standard basic of what we do. And if we keep increasing our skills, we increase the employees' satisfactions, and people stay, and we don't lose people, and they keep growing within the community. And then at the end of the day, all this results in better products, more confidence of people to do things, to try things, to innovate. And innovation was simply not something that was there before. Now we're introducing innovation. We're challenging people to make a difference, and that's key. And then customer focus. Well, this is what it all comes down to. Yeah, we're all here because our companies have customers. Yeah, unlocking the power of data is the most effective way for us to improve our service offerings to customers. Yeah, as well as making our internal operations more effective. So if we focus in on our customers, we get that. We do that in data through data-driven products. Yep. If we've empowered the team to deliver the data-driven products, we win. So when we started this project, we actually were using Airflow for a bit of stuff to help data scientists out and things like that. And in March, we were sort of doing about 3 deployments a week. Now, no one thought that was a bad number from the traditional industry. We thought it was a disgraceful number coming from e-commerce. In December, we were averaging 55 deployments a week. It's still not enough, but it's a huge ramp up in 9 months just by empowering the teams. Yep. So these are things we can achieve. It's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger because we've been ramping up on stages. So in conclusion, I just think that using dbt Cloud, dbt Cloud has just enabled us to be confident to roll it out to 160 analysts. So if the question was to me, can you take a mixed bunch of analysts, give them dbt Cloud, and can they get going? My answer is yes, they can. And it's up to you just to think about finding a way to do that. And I think, from where we were a standing start in March, we've built 38 central data models. We've built the first month that we released our models to the company, there were 68,000 queries in a month. We've reduced 100 hours of technical debt. Now, we put 100 hours there, and then somebody pointed out to me that's probably more like 250 to 300 hours of technical debt a week. And that's just removing all that manual pushing of data across the system. Our data upkeep is over 99%. Now, okay, that sounds wonderful, but actually, this is this is our data models running every day. They're pulling. We've got data analysts building products into our production system. We've got the data modeling team putting models there. We've got direct data coming in from analysts' production areas. So it just proves that the whole thing can be stable with different people putting in data from different points of the company. We can create it to make it stable. So that's really important because that's not this is my great team of analytics engineers. This is everyone in the company refeeding into our data models, and we keep it up at 99%. One of the great stories is the operational emails. So operational emails is not really our area, working off low latency data, triggers, running off and sending emails. We're sending 900,000. This whole process was basically built by 2 engineers, and the rest of the team were fault analysts. So the team of fault analysts building this stuff. Yeah, they were empowered to move the data to trigger these emails and build that stuff. They did it all themselves. So impressive from a team that was just sitting there doing reporting 9 months ago to actually pushing all this data out. The team as a whole does 13,000 commits a month. So that's just a sea change across the whole environment. They're pushing things out to prod all the time. They're making changes, and this is a wrong number as well. 15 dbt projects. I think it's 23 dbt projects we have running at the moment simultaneously. So things can change drastically, and I can see the MCs telling me to move on. So
Questions?
Yeah. Right. Thanks very much, guys. No, thanks. It was really good to hear that. It's amazing to see such a success story in a small amount of time. So we're going to have 5 minutes of questions for Jason and Gordon, and then I think you're going to hang around for a bit at the end, so we can sort of, you can come and speak to the networking. But yeah, any questions so far?
Thank you. Yeah, so we're in a very similar position. I'd say we're in like slide 1 or 2 of your presentation. And I was wondering, what was the most impactful piece of centralization that you did? So barring test and run, let's say, what's the most impactful CI check that you did?
Yeah, so in terms of CI, if do you want me to go into specifics or?
Please do, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Just checking. Yeah, so for example, the way that we work, so just bouncing back off what Dylan was talking about before, that is at what I would say a team level, where the extra layer that we have to deal with is we have to set the tone and how to do things, centralizing it effectively, and then roll it out across many teams. So what we did is, if you're familiar with GitLab, you can do an include statement which pulls from a different repo, which then triggers, in this case, a CI run, which is SQL fluff based on a Docker image. So just tell me if it's going a bit too deep. Okay, yeah, effectively. And then also we have the built-in CI stuff that's in dbt Cloud, running in parallel. One of the things that was interesting with what Dylan was saying before is we're now working towards an issue. Well, when you put the macro for limit 0, for example, you have to do that in every single file. And we already know before we even start doing that 160 people, you're going to miss files. You know, you can't put them, you can manually put them in, but in my head straight away, that's a manual process. You're going to miss a source file somewhere. Then when it runs through, you know, it's going to load the data effectively unless you do something else. So there's things like that we have to think about at central point and then cover it and find a solution so other people don't have to think about that, because they wouldn't necessarily go into that depth. They just expect it to work. So we are currently looking at a way to do that, and it relates to so for example, it's changing the source macro in dbt. So when you type source, it's a macro. What we now do is redirect it to point to our central package first and our version of source, which includes, for example, limit 0 or whatever we need to put in there. If it's not there, then obviously it'll then jump to the default dbt. So it's things like that where we have to think about the issue or something that we want to implement, so CI, and then how do we roll that out? And I think the rolling out part is probably the riskier part to it, because you can implement a CI in your individual team, but we don't want every single team trying this. We should decide what that is, roll it out to them, and then tell them how to use it and what to look for. And I hope that answers your question.
That's good. Thank you. You mentioned you had an issue of data silos before, and you've gone to now 23 different projects. How do you solve the issue of potentially people using the same metrics or creating the same thing over again? Do you use data catalog tools, data dictionaries, or anything like that?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, because we've moved from hundreds of silos to, and it looks like we've got lots of silos living there. The first thing I want to say about the silos is that they are UAT areas where people can play with data and build up their data tooling, and they can answer their questions and things like that. From our side of a view, it is really focused in on actually allowing these guys the freedom to play with the data at the moment, and then pushing that data out. So the idea is that data is then pushing out to Looker or places like that. There are rule sets that we have in place. So production processes can only hit production tables. Yep. I've lost track of the question. Can you just repeat the question? So
it was more about just repeating metrics or metrics between teams being different.
Okay, so I think this sort of goes back to more of our data infrastructure question, which we haven't touched on today, which is we have a very denormalized data infrastructure. Okay, so we have 38 data models. These data models can have up to 300-400 columns in them, and all the data is contained in there. So when we're not asking the analyst to join tables and do the work there. We're actually saying, find your aggregate level of data that you're looking for, and then aggregate that data up. So we're on GCP, Colin in the database. The cheapest way and the best way for us to push that data out is to make sure that if the query is aggregated, it's going to be a lot cheaper than processing that data and creating temporary tables and doing a query. So what we would say is that yes, in our perfect world, these data points should be aggregated. There might be a little bit of filtering, but probably not. That we're aggregating data all the time. Therefore, the data should be the same. Also, we're currently looking at building a semantic layer in Looker that should take control of these answers. dbt, unfortunately, hasn't got a semantic layer for GCP at the moment. I believe it has one for Snowflake at the moment. That they say is coming soon. We'll look into that when it comes. And the semantic layer will also help us aggregate that data up. So it's all about the way we present our data, and the way we present our data is in these big denormalized tables. So the opportunity for analysts to go too far wrong should be really limited in the way they approach that data.
Cheers. We've got time for 2 more questions. One and then.
Oh, thank you. I have a question around tooling. So when you are moving, I mean, you mentioned that there was movement from on-premise to cloud, right? So when you were introducing dbt, were there any questions around the security around it, and what points you put forward to convince that dbt is secure?
Yeah, one of the major security, well, the first one's probably not the major because there's a security person in the room who disagree. One of the first questions we got is, where do we hold the data, and does dbt store the data? And if so, where? And I think that then relates to how dbt works. So as you all know, a dbt holds the code, but not necessarily the data itself. And I think that the rules around that, so for example, GDPR, don't necessarily care so much about the code. They care more about the data itself and the information, PII and things like that held there. So that was something that we came across straight away. It's a case of how does dbt work? Where's this data going? And, does it break any sort of rules? And I think through the process of acquiring dbt, or the dbt cloud, should I say, it was clear that it, passed security checks and it didn't breach any sort of rules that, because it would have been a major issue otherwise, and we wouldn't have gone down that route. But yeah, I think the biggest issue that the first thing they thought of is where's the data hold, which is obviously GCP in our case, and then we control where those regions are, and in our case it's London, and that's where we keep all our data. But yeah, I could go into the application security as well, but I think that's a bigger topic.
Okay, thank you. With a small number of very wide and I imagine very large centralized tables, how do you handle updates to those centralized models from the point of view of changing logic, adding columns, and have you had to extend dbt's functionality to do that efficiently?
Okay, so updating tables in our world is no. Okay, so God, I'm going to have to say a word, and I can never say this word. So Dan, what is the word I'm looking for? Where's Dan gone? Idempotent. Thank you. No, we view our whole update of our whole structure as idempotent. So everything is code based. Yeah. So when we build our tables, we can run them at any time. Now we do bring in incrementals into this, but really, I mean, updating on an OLTP system, updating is a fairly common thing. And on an on-premise system, so when it's a transactional database, it's quite common to see this updating process, snapshotting the data and then running updates through it. So let's say I want to put my GDPR through once a week. Yep, I update all that information all the time. It's not a great way to use a OLAP or a columnar database. It's not just a very good way to, in my opinion, to run your data systems. So what we do is we go for this system where we can rerun our data all the time. So at least once a week, our whole data infrastructure is refreshed. Yep. So the large 85 terabyte tables, they are incremental builds. Yeah. So we will update those once a week. This is because we need to get our GDPR refreshing through the system all the time. Yeah. So you've got your 14 days. So we've always got 2 opportunities to do it. But this is the key thing is that we see the code as the central point of our dbt environment. Yeah, we can refresh a whole system. If the whole system breaks, we can just push a button and it all reruns in about 3.5 hours. So we can reset all our data models in 3.5 hours. The typical run during the week with the incrementals and everything else is about 1.5 hours to run for our system.
So, sorry, tell me if I need to stop.
Yeah.
Say someone comes and changes an expression in one of those columns in the centralized models. What do you do? Do you do a full refresh on a whole table? Do you have some kind of clever system for just reprocessing that column?
So generally speaking, if we change one column, yeah, so that process will refresh. We can run it immediately in our dbt system to check it all works. Once it gets pushed through to our prod, that will run through the next morning, and the whole system will rerun through with that change.
Okay, so a full refresh of the whole model.
Yes, and if it's an incrementalized model, we will then know it's an incrementalized model and make sure that runs the next morning as well.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, so just some really short closing remarks. So thank you everyone who came today. Thank you for the speakers. They were both talks were absolutely brilliant, and thank you very much for the questions as well. So look out for future meetups that we'll be hosting and other people will be hosting, dbt, but other subjects as well. We had an MLOps meetup in our office a couple of weeks ago, so please look out for those, and I promise it will be a little bit cooler next time. Yeah, we're really keen to hear feedback from you, so please, if you can, we'll leave this slide up and scan the QR code and let us know what you felt of the event and some of the things that you enjoyed hearing and some of the things you'd like to hear at future ones. And just kind of final remark before we break. You've seen our new office, we need to fill it up more. So Datatonic is recruiting analytics engineers. So please do kind of visit our website if anyone's looking for sort of a new mission and everything. Yeah, we're a great company to work for. So yeah, but other than that, thanks everyone, and let's have a drink and do some networking.
For me, this
So that's why
Late night, refusing to put my coat on.
I don't know why. Well, depending on yeah, I went very commentary. Why were you about just so it's everything I just it's just a different it's a different world. Like another reason